Thank you, ADB, for having me. My name is Siddharth Hande. I am the founder and CEO of Kabadiwalla Connect. We are a social enterprise that works very much to integrate the informal sector into the formal system. We mainly work in the B2B segment, you could say, helping processors, even though we were initially very much grant funded. I'm a data scientist by training, so my starting point was mapping the informal supply chain in my hometown in Chennai. But these days, very much we're working with international development agencies, with, you could say, producer responsibility organizations, and even brand owners to look at how can you procure material in the global south sustainably, inclusively, how do you work with the informal sector. So the first thing, my outline, I want to talk about informality. And again here, from India, where I come from, I'm from Chennai, the 6th largest city in India. We have about 8 million people. Chennai, like other cities in India, recycling or the collection of recyclable material starts from the informal sector. So it's not a peripheral activity, so the municipality is also doing it. The municipality focuses on landfilling. Whatever they collect from the formal sector goes to our landfills. I suspect this is the case in many cities in the global south. So it's really the informal sector is really the heart of the collection infrastructure for recycling currently. As I said, I'm a data scientist by training. So our starting point on Kabadiwalla Connect was really mapping my informal supply chain, and that's one of the core products that we offer. And since then, we've actually mapped in Indonesia. We've mapped a little bit in the Ivory Coast. And we are always looking to map informal infrastructure anywhere we can find it. So just the context, informality, it's a global problem. 2 billion people work in the informal ecosystem. Waste management in India, or rather recycling in India, is a very classic supply chain where you see informal work all the way up until the processor level. Second, before I started mapping, this is what was known in the academic literature. There was about 1.5 million waste pickers in India, estimated, who were collecting about 20% of the recyclable waste our cities generate. 20% is an incredible number. If that was a formal contract, that's a multi-million-dollar contract. There's also studies that show how the informal sector helps save money for the municipality, which is one of the huge issues we have to solve in the global south. The cost of collection right now is way too expensive. There's a World Bank study which estimates that for effective waste collection in cities in the global south, it can cost municipalities anywhere between 20 to 50% of its budget. But then the big issue, of course, is that informal actors do not get their fair share. So waste pickers, on average, can earn as little as 300 rupees or $4 a day for their work. One of the other important starting points for me, firstly for me, it was quite an academic exercise in the beginning to map the informal supply chain. I wanted to kind of collect this data in Chennai to do a PhD. But one of the big issues I found was that whenever we talk about informal sector, we all have like one stakeholder group that we know quite well, the waste picker. We can all in this room imagine who the waste picker is, what kind of life they live, what kind of value proposition you have towards working with them. But then we also know that the informal sector is collecting large volumes of material. So there are these aggregators who come into the play, because without aggregation, you can't collect that kind of volume in the city. So when we looked at the literature, and so this is a visualization taking the 30 most cited papers of the informal sector in India, and whenever we find a name that is used to define a stakeholder or an aggregator, we kind of mapped it. And so you can see that we can all agree that there is a waste picker. But when it comes to aggregators, who are they? Are they middlemen? Are they traders? Are they scrap shops? So what we kind of started doing was, I wanted to do a census of every single aggregator I found in Chennai. So we hired a bunch of interns. We walked every single street, so we brute forced this. We walked every single street in Chennai, and we started mapping the material flow and the stakeholders active in the recycling or the informal recycling supply chain. And so what we found was quite incredible. This is a map on the left of the aggregators we found. So you can see on the left that the informal sector, the informal aggregators actually represent infrastructure that the city can leverage in the collection of waste. The other thing that's really interesting about this map is that they actually are very decentralized in their approach. So you have multiple small scrap shops available in neighborhoods, and by the way, in Indonesia as well, lapaks, I believe they're called. In India, they're called kabadiwallas. These small scrap shops that are set up in neighborhoods that buy material from waste pickers, but also buy material from households and apartments and small businesses in the city. So in Chennai, we found that they were collecting 130,000 tons of waste. That's about 24% of what the city generates. Already, they were collecting about 20,000 tons of plastic, mainly PET, but also a lot of PP and PE, like rigid PP and PE. PET in India, there's a big PET to textile industry, so it's actually part of a global supply chain. But they were also collecting other kinds of material. And honestly, they can be leveraged to collect anything you want. At least this is our hypothesis. In terms of the stakeholder groups, what we have found mapping now in different cities, mapping in different contexts as well, we primarily see three major types of stakeholders in the informal supply chain. So waste pickers, who we all know, what we call level 0 aggregators, at least what we internally call level 0 aggregators. They walk the streets, scavenge, look for material they think they can sell to a small scrap shop. In India, they're called kabadiwallas. In Indonesia, they're called lapaks. These folks are actually very kind of retail oriented. They're material agnostic, so they buy anything they think and they aggregate higher volumes, which is critical in the supply chain. These folks buy paper, plastic, glass, metal, and then they sell to a level 2 aggregator, which is kind of like an informal material recovery facility, you can say. So these level 2 guys are more like warehouses. They do some critical pre-processing, so they will bale material or they will shred material or do things like that. In Chennai, we found close to 2,000 level 1 aggregators all across the city, and then about 300 level 2 aggregators who are more clustered. So you had a plastic cluster, you had a metal cluster, you had a paper cluster. And then from there, material was going far distances depending on the type of material. So PET is a global supply chain, so it's going to big formal processors, whereas PPE are still local recycling, informal recycling, where they were remanufacturing it into buckets, for local consumption, things like that. However, that is changing. Now we have big companies looking in setting up large kind of processing facilities. Just one point on what Professor actually mentioned about PET. Again, we believe this line. So high volume off-takers drive incredible collection rates from the informal sector. So when you look at India, PET to textile is part of a global supply chain. People are buying PET bottles, making yarn out of it, and then selling to global brands who are then selling it outside. And so when you actually look at the collection rate, so what I'm trying to show here is we took a cluster of wards. So wards is the smallest administrative boundary in India. So they have anywhere between 50 to 100,000 people. So when we took a cluster of wards between, that were kind of like around our two major rivers in Chennai, and we took the level 1 aggregators within that ward. And we looked at what is the plastic capacity that they're collecting today. You can actually see PET is like, in some cases, over 100%, which just shows the activity around PET. So in the wards across the Coombe River, they're collecting, the informal sector is collecting something like 98 metric tons a month, whereas the data is showing that it should be generating about 110. So close, and in some cases over, just to show the value of the collection system they have. Whereas in other materials, our belief is as more formal or serious processes come into the ecosystem, you can leverage this type of infrastructure to see these kinds of collection rates. So Casey, last couple of slides. So we are, like I said, our goal as a social enterprise is the rapid integration of the informal sector holistically and inclusively. So we offer mapping as a base layer because right now these informal supply chains are invisible, and policymakers or even large off-takers just don't know how to come in and leverage these stakeholders. On top of that, we've developed a lot of informal sector friendly digitalization solutions that are all based on mass balance. So mass balance is a key thing that you have to solve for digitalization. So, I buy 100 tons here or 100 kgs here, that aggregates to 1 ton, that aggregates to 20 tons. So you really need to account for the mass balance, which is possible because, again, the informal sector, they already follow a general ledger system. When they buy and sell, they have a bill, they have a record. It's just about digitalizing that and then putting in a mass balance system to build trust. And then, especially in India, we're really working on the sourcing and the collection element of leveraging this stakeholder group. So this is not a complete slide. Just in terms of our integration pathway, what we always say, First is enumeration, especially in Latin America, they're actually really good with this type of enumeration work. We believe the first step is enumeration, then working with different social packages that are out there and integrating, especially the ultra poor like waste pickers, into these kind of social integration packages, but then really work on the procurement and then the dignified collection aspect. So one of the big things that we would like to see is waste pickers and small scrap shops integrated with the municipality to organize last mile collection directly from households. So they don't have to scavenge and kind of like work between that livelihood and the health and safety element of the way they do business. And last slide, or second last slide, we were initially very grant funded, especially our mapping work. But more and more now, especially with companies like Shell, we did some work with Veolia in Indonesia actually a few years ago. There's this big question of how do we secure reliable feedstock in a compliant, inclusive way in the global south? And we're helping answer that question, with data being the first layer of what we do. And yeah, my last slide, I would just say, I think by leveraging the informal waste ecosystem, it would be possible to collect single-stream municipal waste back at an industrial scale. And I look forward to all your questions. Casey is on a mission to map 100 cities in the next few years of these informal supply chains, so we're always looking to partner with people. Thank you very much.